afternoon, and thank you for joining us at the Design Lounge. I'm Jean-Pierre Lacroix, president of Chiquetin Lacroix, and I'm very excited about today's session on the new definition of sustainability, the organic sector. We'll be covering a lot of very interesting subjects from where the industry is going, trends driving the industry, what are the challenges facing the organic sector, and who's doing a great job in marketing and leveraging organic products. I have with me Matthew Holmes, who is the Executive Director of the Canadian Organic Trade Association, a separate organization from the U.S., who will be sharing with us his insights and knowledge of where the industry is going. Welcome, Matthew.
Thank you very much. Pleased to be here today.
So, Matthew, why don't you share with the audience a little bit about the Canadian OTA?
Sure. The COTA, as we're called, or the Canada Organic Trade Association, is a membership-based organization. It represents the entire value chain of the organic sector, from farmers through to retailers and everybody in between, manufacturers, certifying bodies. We work very closely with government to move the sector towards good, rigorous organic standards, regulation, enforcement of our claims in the marketplace. And we do a lot for our business members to network and create basically the environment for their businesses to succeed.
So, Matthew, how many members form part of the Canadian Organic Trade Association?
There's two affiliate organizations, the Organic Trade Association and the Canada Organic Trade Association. Combined, we have anywhere in the range of 1,500 to 1,700 members. In North America, we have some global non-voting members as well. The trade membership in Canada is in the range of 200 members currently.
Matthew, can you share with the audience the current status of the organic sector? Where do we stand?
Sure. It's a very exciting sector. Globally right now, about $52 billion a year in sales, growing very rapidly. It hasn't been uncommon to see the range of 20% annual growth cited for many years, the last decade certainly. Canada is relatively new on the scene. We've just recently gone through the process of regulating the sector in Canada here. So what that means is that the national organic standards in Canada are now mandatory. So to make an organic claim in the marketplace, you need to be certified to the Canadian organic standards. You need to be presenting those claims in a unified way so that everybody's playing by the same rule book, basically, and the organic claims are consistent, so that consumers can have a confidence in the market, a clear understanding of what they're buying, and there's less variety of certifier marks and competing claims at play.
I noticed that when we were doing the strategic analysis for Agri-Canada on the organic trade, that provincial bodies have their own identity and their own standards, or not standards, but identity. You have the USDA and the US have their own identity and standards, and obviously in Europe. How unified are these standards, or is Canada different than the rest of the world?
It's a very good question. There's actually quite a lot of diversity in the sectors around the world, and partly that's because the organic standards themselves are generated by the organic farmers within specific geographical regions. So as a farmer is encountering certain conditions or pests, and they need to come up with appropriate responses to those end up making their ways into the organic standards. So in Canada, with long, cold winters, we don't have quite the same pressures on our crop systems as farmers in Mexico might. And as a result of that, the Canadian organic standards, although they share in principle the same founding principles of probably all organic standards around the world, in practice they are unique because they've been separately designed and developed by Canadian organic farmers. You see that across the globe, and what it does is we're both a very united movement or family of people that are taking care of the earth and livestock and crops, but we also have a particular ability at introducing non-tariff barriers to trade for ourselves. By virtue of our unique standards, we often have areas in which we can't quite trade freely. So that's one of the challenges I'll be speaking to today, is the next step of taking the global organic movement into a global organic trade.
A key component of the organic initiative is the sustainability factors. Can you talk a little bit about What impact does the organic sector have sustainability? I know over coffee we talked a lot about oil usage and in the fertilizers and in the use of petrochemical products and their impact on the environment. Can you talk a little bit about sustainability and the organic movement and the values it brings?
Sure. Sustainability, and I often use it in quotes because it's a very weighted term and it's somewhat charged. And everybody in agriculture will tell you that they're sustainable. In fact, they would be very curious if they claimed that they were otherwise. So everybody says they're sustainable by definition, but we would argue that there's quite a spectrum within that. And organic is codified. It follows very strict and rigorous standards. It's inspected to those standards by third parties, and it's enforced now by major governments around the world, so that anybody who's saying they're organic is, in fact, meeting a certain sustainability threshold and system that we've established. Whereas other claims of sustainability don't really have that force of law or that regulatory oversight involved. When you look at what organic, typically in how people encounter organic, they encounter it in the negatives, and we don't like to speak of those exclusively. So, no pesticides or no synthetic chemical pesticides or toxic, persistent toxic chemicals, synthetic fertilizers and those sorts of things. We try to present much more of a holistic and open view of what we are. When we talk about sustainability, what organic farmers are trying to do is build the life back into the soil and back into the earth so that the microflora and fauna at the soil level are actually activating the nutrients that the plants need. So instead of getting into this repetitive cycle where you're putting a fertilizer onto a crop that ends up often leaching out of the soil into the water system, creating imbalances and waves of pests that you then have to address with pesticides, and you get into this constant imbalance cycle. What we're trying to do is create the right criteria for the plants to respond well to the soil and to have natural predators in place for the pests so that the cycle is much more holistic and much closer to nature. When we look at fossil fuels, one of the major sources of fertilizer in the conventional agricultural world is nitrogen-based, and it's a fossil fuel fertilizer. When we talk about a fossil fuel fertilizer system in the same breath as sustainability, and all of us are aware of the issues around fossil fuels right now and the depleting resources that we're encountering as a species, in organic, we feel we have an advantage because we're not premising our agriculture on the use of fossil fuels, period. So we use less energy. Many studies have shown up to half of the energy usage on organic farms. We have much more labor-intensive agriculture usually, so we're using more human labor, sometimes more timely labor, but we don't have those added costs, and we don't have those carbon footprints. In addition, there's some early science that's starting to show that organic agriculture actually functions as a carbon sequestering. So we have a higher rate of pulling carbon out of the atmosphere and putting it back into the soil, which can play a role in greenhouse gas reduction as well. So
that's very interesting.
There's some very promising work that's coming out.
Great. That's great insights. Who would have thought that organic was a net contributor to sustainability initiatives?
Absolutely.
So Matt, what challenges does the industry face to continue growing?
There's a number. Traditionally, supply has been our main challenge, and I think in the future it will continue to be. During the recession recently, there was kind of a little bit of pressure came off the top, and that was, I think, probably ultimately a good thing for the organic sector. It was growing very quickly, and we were really experiencing a bit of a bottleneck in terms of supply. In the future, I think that will return as an issue, particularly as we see emerging economies, emerging markets demand organic, and their demand for organic rise, and that will be a challenge, I think. Currently, the $52 billion in sales a year of organic is concentrated 97% in the United States and the European Union. And as we see other markets begin to adopt organic and demand organic, that's going to be putting quite a bit of pressure on the system. There's a number of different challenges we face. Some are market-based and some are message-based, I guess I would say. So one is making sure that there's good, strong consumer understanding of what organic means. We still encounter a lot of confusion in the marketplace. There's competing claims, certainly. There's also a great opportunity. There's a heightened awareness of food issues in the consumer's mind right now. So we see local, we see eco, we see sustainable, we see natural. We see an incredible energy around farmers markets. And there's interest generally in food, in knowing where your food comes from. Organic has a lot to offer that population and those issues. We have one of the original traceability systems. So we can track an organic product right down to the farm where its ingredients came from. We have third-party inspections and systems that are on top of any other required government-regulated systems and inspections. So it's a very closely scrutinized food system, and it brings a lot of credibility to consumers' minds when they understand that. Some of the challenges we face are trade-based. Because we have unique standards in most major markets, it's difficult for us to trade as much as we could. As we invite governments and work with governments to address the consumer confusion issue by regulating and codifying organic claims in the marketplace, what ends up happening as a result is we can no longer trade with our trading partners as easily as we once did, because everything must now be according to one system or one standard, whatever the market of destination is. And so you'll see in the prairies, in the Canadian prairies, where you have organic grain growers who are supplying much of the world with their organic wheat, you'll see some certified organic farmers taking on 5 or 6 different certifications in order to sell to Japan, to Europe, to the US, to Canada, and elsewhere. And so that creates a bit of a challenge for us from a market perspective. Messaging, we really need to educate consumers more. We're trying to do more to reach out to consumers and also to address some of the disparities that are out there with competing claims that might not have as rigorous a claim as organic is.
So Matthew, is there confusion about organic versus natural? I know I read the paper every week. There's something about how great natural is and locally grown produces and products, and is that creating confusion in the marketplace on what is organic and what isn't?
I think it is, ultimately. We saw some research come out, a company by the name of BrandSpark that does some consumer research, put out some information that got picked up by the Canadian press in January of 2010 that found that approximately half of Canadians think that a natural claim on a product meets more of a codified standard and government oversight than an organic claim does, when in fact it's the exact opposite. What we're seeing now is that natural claims on new food products are probably the number 1 or number 2 most used new marketing claim on food in North America. And technically, the natural claim means very little. There's no standard definition. There's no standards. There's no government requirements or follow-up or enforcement on exactly what that means. Originally, many will say that the organic sector came out of the natural sector. And this was really a post-World War II concern around all of the preservatives, additives, colors, flavors, and other strange things showing up in our food. And in the 60s and 70s, there was a response to that, which basically sought to get back to whole foods. And that was the origin of the so-called natural food movement. So under the original model, a natural food would not have any preservatives or colors or additives in it. What organic did was it said, well, let's establish a system so that everybody's saying the same thing when they say it's natural. But natural was already being used, so we used organic for a variety of reasons. And what we did was we didn't just look at how the food was processed, we looked at the entire chain back to the seed of how the food was grown. And that's where we developed organic standards from. So that's where we came up with a full system of inspection and certification that looks at from the seed to the table. and includes everything in between. So an organic product will not have any artificial colors or additives or preservatives in it. And it will be as close to a whole food as possible.
In the U.S., there's USDA, which is, I guess, a certification for organics. I know we were involved with them, that certification, when we did the rebranding of Wild Oats. And in Canada, the CFIA, I guess, is the governing body that controls the certification in Canada. Can you talk a little bit about the two systems? What's common between the two, and really also what are the watch-outs that a brand marketer would need to consider if they're considering importing a product from the U.S. or exporting a product from Canada?
It's a very important question. The systems are parallel. I would say they're mutually exclusive at a very basic level. So technically speaking, to sell into the U.S., your product needs to be USDA organic. It needs to be certified, and all of its ingredients certified to the U.S. system of organic. Similarly for Canada, technically speaking, everything that you sell into Canada has to be certified to the Canadian organic standards, which are unique and different, by a separately accredited certifying body recognized by Canadian authorities. There's overlap. There's some U.S. certifiers that also are Canadian certifiers and vice versa. The standards themselves are very close when you actually get down to a gap analysis and compare the two of them. But again, they formed out of two separate groups of farmers. Canadian organic farmers developed the Canadian organic standards. U.S. organic farmers developed their organic standards. And so, although they pretty much share the same principles and the same approaches, their means to an end may not always be the same. We have in the U.S. Department of Agriculture, which oversees the National Organic Program. And in Canada, we have the Canadian Food Inspection Agency, which oversees the Canada Organic Regime. These are basically equivalent regulatory process and policies with strong enforcement arms linked to them. Interestingly, though, about a year ago, in June of 2009, a real world-first landmark agreement was signed between the two governments that is called the Equivalency Arrangement, the U.S.-Canada Organic Equivalency Arrangement. And what this does is it basically opens the door to a freer trade within the organic sector between the U.S. and Canada. And what this means is that if your product or its ingredients are already certified to the USDA organic program, and you can provide an assurance that it meets the specific terms of this agreement, then that product can flow into the Canadian market, and vice versa. So it's very important for Canadian producers to have access to a market which is approximately 15 times their own in terms of organic sales, without having to take on a second redundant certification. What we in the Canadian marketplace need to remember is that the markets are very integrated. So if you're putting forward a brand or a product, you're probably looking at both markets. And you want to be able to basically hit all the high points without creating too much inefficiencies. This equivalency arrangement allows you to do that. It's very efficient for trade, it streamlines the two systems, and it's a good deal for organic farmers as well.
So does that mean that we're going to see a lot more USDA stamped products in the Canadian market? Or does that mean that products that are going to be marketed in Canada that have been certified will have to comply to the CFIA seal?
Well, before we had the Canadian regulation in place, there was no regulation in place, and so anybody could basically come into market. Anybody could send their organic product to Canada, and we didn't really have much of a mechanism for saying this is organic and this is not. What the new regulation does is it says that everything that comes into Canada meets the Canadian definition of organic. And by virtue of this trade agreement with the U.S., included within that definition are USDA organic products which meet certain terms and conditions of the agreement. What you will see is basically about 75% of organic products in Canada are imported currently, and a lion's share of that is from the U.S. I think you'll see that continue for the time being. What you won't see is necessarily a huge dump of new U.S. products in the Canadian marketplace. They're pretty much established brands here already. There are new brands showing up, but there's a lot of Canadian brands also in competition. The use of the logo is interesting. Under the agreement, the USDA logo can be interchanged with the Canada Organic logo if it meets the terms of this agreement. If it does that and it's a product of the US, it has to clearly state beside the logo that it's an imported product or a product of the USA.
So, Matthew, what are the great examples of organizations that have embarked on the organic movement and have leveraged it very effectively in the marketplace?
It's an interesting question. There's actually quite a broad range. It's a very diverse sector. We have a lot of independent family-owned businesses. Some of the world's largest and most successful organic businesses are actually still family-controlled and family-run. Some of them are Canadian, in fact. You also have a number of large multinational food businesses that have seen great value in organic lines, both in diversifying what they offer their customer base, as well as a way to bringing on a social and environmental responsibility element into their portfolio. Organic often can offer some of those benefits to a company. So we'll see a number of publicly traded companies buying organic brands or introducing organic lines to diversify their offerings.
So what kind of companies? Yeah? Can you name brands or?
Yeah, sure. We have a few. Some of the ones that people will be very familiar with, Whole Foods Markets, very successful retailer brand that's really developed a lot of the space for organic commerce to take place. They have a very strong organic offering in their retail establishment. We have UNFI, which is a distributor of organic products throughout the U.S. and into Canada now as well. A very strong company, publicly traded. We have Synopta as well, which is a very successful global company based in Canada, also publicly traded. And they are one of the world's largest movers of organic ingredients and have a very strong arm in the U.S. that processes soy products as well. So a lot of the aseptic Tetra Pak containers of soy milk, organic soy, will actually come through a Synopta facility.
Yeah, they're one of our clients, and I know that they do a great job of also helping farmers through the conversion from conventional farming, because I think there's a lag time of 3 years before you can get certified to be an organic grower. And I know that they help finance and support those growers because they see the future of organic being an important element to both sustainability and also for well-being of mankind.
That's right. And what I usually, when I'm speaking about this, I'll talk about that as marketing versus engagement. If you're looking at getting into the organic sector, it's a very diverse sector, but it's one that is very socially conscious. And some of the real leaders out there are the ones who are doing that sort of mentorship with the transition year, because obviously as you spend 3 years adopting organic principles and practices and you take on additional costs, but you can't sell those products as organic, it's a very difficult time for farmers. And so some of those strong brands have really led the way in facilitating and working with their farmer suppliers to do that.
So Matthew, we talked a lot about trends in the marketplace, trends on organic and what's driving the growth and, you know, the policies and the guidelines if you wanted to launch a product. But if you are a consumer packaged good company and you are considering a line of organic, what should they be considering?
There's a number of things to look at. Certainly understanding the regulatory framework. There's a certain infrastructure in place for organic. It's the organic standards, the regulation, very specific claims on what you are allowed and are not allowed to say. Those are very important before you launch a brand. You should also have a good understanding of the organic marketplace. Market data is important. Consumer attitudes, understandings, and buying habits, very important. And you can look to the trade association and some other groups to provide that sort of data. Particularly important if you're in a segment that may be highly competitive or one that's positioned for great growth. There's a number of those within the organic sector, and it's a good idea to know where you stand and where your products might fit in. One of the other things that's probably advisable is to also have an understanding of your supply. So what's your supply base? Because you can't just go and look around for an ingredient necessarily, because you're already operating within a limited supply base by looking for organic. And within that, you're looking for a specific organic to the market you're selling to, whether that's the US or Canadian or the European market. You need an organic product that's certified appropriately and has all of the paperwork to carry with it to the market that you want to sell to. So you need to already have in place basically a very good business plan that you know what you're selling, where you're selling it to, and what you're sourcing in order to make that product. So it actually makes a very good condition for business because you've done a lot of the work in advance.
So Matthew, you've been involved with a lot of organizations who've come to you and your association for guidance and help. What are the pitfalls? I mean, we talked a little bit about, understanding the guidelines and the restrictions, but what would be one of the key pitfalls that an organization typically runs into if they don't plan properly? What would be one of the ahas that you got to watch out for?
One is overextension. We see there's tremendous growth and tremendous opportunity, and we've seen a number of small businesses just ride that wave and perhaps ride it a little too fast. And it's not great to see a business fail because there's too much demand. It's actually pretty sad. So that can be a challenge. The capacity, the understanding of the regulatory system, the standards is of essence, and I can't stress it enough. We have a lot of businesses that push everything they have into marketing a great product, and one little hiccup can actually stop that product from being organic right off the bat, and that's also a real danger. Finally, again, just an understanding of the marketplace, where you fit into it, and how you need to comply with the various claims and systems.
So Matthew, a key question that we often get involved in trends, and the real question in trends is are we at the beginning of the trend or at the end of the trend? Is the wave crashing on the beach, or is it still in the process of cresting? And when you think of organic, it'd be interesting to understand, are we at the beginning of this trend, or is this a trend that's already plateaued? What do you see the future for organics?
It's obviously everybody's reading the tea leaves on this one, but we're fairly certain that we're no longer a trend. In the U.S. alone, organic production is 3.7% of total food production. We're getting into a certain scale where it's hard to deny that we're there anymore. Organic food, organic products, non-food products are available in mainstream national grocery and retailers across the board, across the world now. And people are increasingly looking for those products. So we see growth. We see growth continuing. We see growth continuing in established markets and in new markets as well. One of the things we need to do more of as this happens is do more to engage with the consumer. We're doing a number of things at the Organic Trade Association to reach out to consumers when they're most receptive to information, when they're doing that food research that they do. So one of the things we're doing is called the Connect the Dots campaign, which we're helping them as they search for information about food or food practices that may be of concern to them or maybe in the news recently, that they're actually going to see some ads show up in their searching relating to organic and bringing them back to organic, to really get out on the forefront of that exchange and start educating consumers about what organic really means and the fact that it's there and available to them as an option. We're also getting out more in Canada with the public media and developing programs, websites, information supplements to engage with consumers in the New York Times, in the Globe and Mail newspaper. We've done a number of things recently to try and educate and engage. If we look at where the global organic movement is going, I like to make an analogy to a whiskey company, Diageo. And if you consider Diageo, they're one of the world's largest makers of alcohol. They own many of the premium brands and many of the popular brands that we're all familiar with. What they have really successfully done is brought in the single malt whiskey market with their certain selection of premium single malts that are definitive of the various regions of Scotland for distilling. Recently, in the last few years, they've let it be known that because supply is very tight, Diageo is going to basically be renegotiating its contracts or limiting its supply to its traditional markets, such as North America, and instead sending some of those 10, 15, 18-year scotches out to markets like China and India. These are markets where they're looking for status symbols, they're looking for quality products from countries they trust, and they're looking for premium, good quality consumer products. I see Diageo's single malt whiskey as an analogy to the organic sector and where we're going to be in 10 years. And that will be, of course, a supply concern, but it's also ultimately a point of growth.
Great. That's great. Great to be in a category that is growing and consumers want to buy the product. Thank you very much for joining us. We're going to open the lines in the screen at the bottom. You can see a call-in number. Please dial it. We'll leave the lines open for the next 15 minutes so we can have a vivid conversation about the organic sector, and Matthew's here to answer any questions you may have. You can also see in the bottom of your screen a download window that you can actually download the white paper and the presentation that you have today. And we'll be posting this presentation as part of an archive, a video webinar next week, and I'll be sending you a link. So thank you very much for joining Matthew and myself for this organic sector workshop, and we look forward to your questions. Thank you.